This panel is called, as I think you know, basically, whose job is it anyway? Collecting credits in the recording studio. And I'm going to introduce our panelists just briefly. Cameron Craig is a two-time Grammy-winning producer, mixer engineer who has worked with artists from Adele, Annie Lennox, Bjork, and Amy Winehouse to Joe Strummer, and many more. And he's the executive director of the UK's Music Producers Guild and also sits on the board of UK Music. Hello. Sylvia Massy is too young to be a legend, but as one of the first female music producers, well, she is kind of a legend. Over her 30 plus years in the studio, she's worked with artists from Red Hot Chili Peppers to Johnny Cash and Prince, and she's also in demand as an audio educator. Junior Regisford has pretty much seen it all, working as a music supervisor and a manager for artists, producers, and songwriters. He's worked with a diverse group of superstars, including Lady Gaga, Ice Cube, Sting, French Montana, and Enrique Iglesias. He's a manager with New Heights Entertainment, New Heat Entertainment, and is also co-founder and head of music at the World of Dance Records. And Craig Rosen is executive VP of A&R and label operations at Atlantic Records. And I'm personally thrilled that I was able to cajole him into joining us for this panel. Craig has been at Atlantic over 20 years and has witnessed the changes that have occurred in record making in that time from inside a record label. I want to start off with a little something somebody said at the DDEX plenary the other day. Barry Coughing, who is a music supervisor and producer, was talking about how records are made today. And this is maybe even a simple example of how records are made today. He said there were 99 tracks. There were 34 people working on it. The basic tracks were done in Houston. The vocals were recorded in Memphis. The horns were recorded in Miami. The strings in Seattle. Keyboards and programming were done in Katy, Texas. It was mixed in Winnipeg, Canada, and mastered in Nashville. So it's sort of a bit of a level set of how things are done today. There was only one producer, though, and I'm not sure how common that is in pop records today. Multiple producers as well as multiple engineers. So first for the group, I want to have them tell us what their role is in collecting and organizing music credits. And just going to go alphabetically here. And I will, well, actually, I'm going to go maybe in order of the process. Sylvia, why don't you go first?
Okay. We're talking about the collecting of credits for release, right? Yep. Well, as a record producer, it would typically be my job to make sure that the credits are recorded. But there, you know, in the way that I'm making records now, I don't usually have an assistant, so I'm doing it all on my own. And so typically these days is when I'm done with the masters, I'll collect together as much data as I can put together and then deliver that with the masters. And it usually takes place before the mastering session or with the whoever the client is. If it's a label, then I'll deliver it to them.
How about you, Cameron?
A lot of my records are a lot more chaotic than that. So, you know, I think the example you gave, he's lucky they're all sort of in the one country, so to speak, because quite often I'll give stuff that comes to me from all over the place. So, and quite often I won't know who's done what. I sort of really hope that the producer does. So, and they usually do, but yeah, I'm not privy to a lot of that information, especially at mixing stage. Recording can be a little bit easier, but not always the case, because I'm never really the sole engineer on a project anymore. So.
Yeah, typically for you, you're engineering and producing, right, Sylvia?
Yes. Yeah, I usually wear a lot of different hats. And so being the producer and taking care of budgets, I also will deliver the credits, but it's really only what I do here. If the tracks go to someone else to cut vocals or to do overdubs or to mix somewhere else, then I hand that whole responsibility off to somebody else.
And neither of you usually has an assistant to help you,
Right?
Yeah. Craig, what's your role?
Well, as the label representative on the in the conversation, we are really the receivers, collators, fact checkers of the information as it comes in, and essentially serve as the proxy for the artist as far as putting together those credits the way they envision it based on what they've agreed to, and kind of their take on what the reality of the final product was.
That's interesting. Can you explain that last sentence?
Well, I mean, especially today, Sylvia sort of touched on, Cameron did as well, and even you did in your intro, that records can be made in a variety of ways now, and it's actually, there's more and more possibility that no one's really sure exactly what ended up in that final mix or where it came from. So there's a little bit of perception of who did what, who wrote more than someone else wrote, which guitar solo is actually in the mix, whose background vocal was that from the demo? No, I re-sang it. Oh, no, you're right, that was from the demo. All those kinds of things.
Right.
Especially with a lot of unattended mixing now. I think that's
Right.
even more of an issue. As somebody who does unattended mixing all the time, I don't know whose part I'm taking out. It's just
Well, that's part of creating the magic, is letting a new set of ears, create that final version.
Mm.
With full vision.
And Junior.
So if I've done the role of the label A&R person, but I'm more today I'm in the role of helping producers and managing producers. So from that standpoint, I end up being the one responsible to help the producer, because the producer is ultimately responsible for the credits of tracking everyone down. So I end up having to be the person to help facilitate that. We'll have a template of basic credits we know we need to go get. I'll start with my client as the producer, and can we fill out what blanks are we missing here? Writer, producer, musicians, engineer, locations. I have like basically a grid. What are we missing? So I'll start with the producer, and he usually doesn't, he or she doesn't know everything. I'll end up having to call the writers and call the musicians, and so it ends up being this sort of group effort. Some producers are more on it than others, and they kind of think of those things because they know ultimately I'll get a producer agreement for them to sign, and in that producer agreement there'll be a requirement that the credits turn in, and that's how they get paid. So that's kind of how we do it, but it's definitely not at one studio like the record plant and we can go there and get everything. It's literally from 3 or 4 different home studios, and the mix engineer may have used a big studio or not. So we're going to at least 6, 7 different places to piece it together. But I look at it as the producer's responsibility, and me being a producer manager currently, it's on me to help and kind of facilitate it, get on the calls, confirm the writer splits with all the writers, and have them all go on an email and confirm they all agree, So it becomes a group effort from my standpoint.
A lot of work.
Yeah.
I think all of us traditionally and still today agree that the producer or the person who is contracted with the label, we'll just say label as the overall term of who's going to be, the content owner, the agreement, the producer agreement says that they are going to deliver the credits. And the producers and engineers wing definition of producer that gets used for Grammy Awards, we also say that the producer is responsible for working with the artist and the label to deliver the final correct credits to wherever media company, wherever it needs to go to be made into what we used to call liner notes and maybe you still call label copy. So I think that's something we can all agree on, but I think it's also a lot harder today to know who really is the producer, and there are multiple producers, right?
Yeah, so much data gets lost because you're moving so quickly, hopefully with this creative process that as a producer / engineer, if you're doing everything, then the last thing that you need to do is, when you're in the midst of it, is to write down who played this part, what equipment was used, the dates and the times. All that gets lost, and so much of it is kind of pieced together at the end of the project. In order to get paid, of course, we're going to write down the credits as much as we can remember, but so much gets lost.
Well, and it's such a departure from, say, how jazz records were made when a group of musicians went into a room, played a song 3 times, you wrote down everyone's name, you knew how long they were there, you knew who recorded it, and the real mystery was it take 1, 2, or 3, and that when that was all that needed to be collected, it was a lot simpler of a job.
Yeah, I want to address what Sylvia said about speed too. I've been talking. I did a lot of talking to engineers and studio people before this panel, and one of the things they talked about was how fast a lot of them have to work. If you're working, one person worked with a producer who also would come over and run the Pro Tools some of the time, but they want those sessions to move like this and how they're thinking and what's happening, and you're capturing the magic. And so he's got a pad next to the desk where he tries to scribble down everything that he has to know, like which take was which and which loop was which and, which beat was which and maybe where it came from, and put it all together in a couple of hours after the session. And those sessions can be long. So I guess maybe you've already explained it, but let's just talk a little bit more about the biggest challenges you face in collecting and organizing that. And Craig, in our pre-panel, you said some interesting things sort of philosophically about what's changed that makes it harder.
Right. So
besides all of what we've already said.
I mean, the biggest change really has been the change in what our final product is. So when it was a physical product, the collection of credits was attached to the manufacturing of that product. So whether you were putting out vinyl or a CD or whatever that product was, you needed to collect the credits in order to print the booklet, in order to put the product, and your deadline was weeks or months out from the street date. So you had a real hard deadline. And in fact, the credits and the artwork was due before the music was due because you needed extra time to actually print the booklet or print the jacket. So it always was about getting the most accurate snapshot of exactly what happened. And there was the pressure of you primarily only had one chance to get it right. And then once it came out, you realized you misspelled someone's name, you left out an assistant engineer. The answer was, we'll fix that in the next run, and hopefully there was a next run. The difference today is that the music comes out so quickly, comes out digitally, and all you really need now to put out a piece of music is the audio and a thumbnail piece of art, and it goes. So the difference now is that we spend a lot of time updating credits on the fly because there is no snapshot moment anymore.
Right.
Cameron,
Sure,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
just jump in.
like Craig was talking about, there's the credits don't travel with the masters anymore, and that seems to be the biggest problem for me. Besides just taking the time to enter the data, that you have to keep entering for every new song, new track. It's just a lot of work, and then that information doesn't really travel with the piece of music either. It kind of gets swallowed up in and the formats get changed. It's since the studio's not an exclusive place anymore. It used to be very exclusive, and there was always a system for collecting and keeping the credits with the masters, but that's totally gone now.
Yeah, I would also add the way people work has changed. Has actually made it more complicated as well. So you've got, no more hard deadline, right? You have a looser sort of definition of who a producer is these days. They're way more collaborative and way more willing to share that credit with one another the way things work digitally, where someone will work on a track and they'll send it to someone at their place. They'll add a guitar, a bass line. Oh, you know what? Some people are like, you know what? I might give you a producer credit on that too. They're looser with who is actually the producer. So you'll end up having a track with 3 producers, that get credit. Now, which one of those 3 producers is ultimately responsible for the credits? We don't know. We have to figure that out because some of them have never produced before. Some of them are, just learning. So you have a looser term of producer, multiple locations, and the idea of a deadline. There really isn't as hard deadline as it used to be, like Craig is saying, from the labels. As long as they get the file and they have an agreement in place that they have ownership of the track, they're putting the record out. And all right, so if you guys didn't turn them in, we'll just figure it out as you turn it in. So there's less urgency unless someone's really focused on it from the producer standpoint to make sure it gets done. It may or may not get done.
Yeah, I mean, when
It'd be
we
horrible to think that we did all that work that Sylvia was talking about.
Yeah.
Passed it on to a producer that was less experienced.
Yeah.
He didn't realize it was important and didn't carry forward. So
it happens.
Craig, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, reflective of the speed of how things move now. When the group of us got together on Friday to talk about, today's presentation at Atlantic, we had just put out a future Little Uzi Vert album with 16 songs on it. And by the time we're in this call today, the album now has 8 more songs on it.
Yeah.
And on Friday, I didn't even know those 8 songs existed.
Yes.
So that's how quickly stuff moves now.
What you're saying plays into something brought up on one of our producer and engineer wing committee calls this week about how fixing credits down the line is kind of really a necessity now because of the way things evolve. So to consider perhaps there isn't any end point, but conversely, there's also the matter of collecting royalties and collecting those fractions of pennies from around the world and from all sorts of divergent sources. And I've heard it said that if you don't get your data properly into the supply chain right at the beginning, you'll never be able to get all of it completely corrected. So that's food for thought, because we're talking about the sort of flexibility of this information coming in over time. And yet what we really want is to get it in as quickly as possible so that it gets to all the right places and doesn't need to be corrected. The dichotomy. Any thoughts on that, or is that just a fact?
No, I have a thought, and the thing is, I just think it's the irony of it all. It's actually less of a deadline now to get credits in. It's more of an evolving process to get them done when with technology and all of the new ways you can make money and earn, all the other places that may not have existed before to earn money, it's actually more urgent to get them correct on the onset and get them in early so you're not missing any money. So it's a sort of, weird sort of dichotomy of, the looseness that exists, but truthfully, it actually should be more buttoned down now, given, if you represent creators and writers and producers and engineers that get royalties, they need it to be right on the on set, because you're missing pennies out the gate.
I guess that's the incentive for everybody is that if the credits are done early and can follow through, then we all get paid. So it should be that should be the motivation for people to get their credits done. But when you're being creative, because music is a creative thing, it's very hard to anticipate where where it will go, if it's going to make any money at all,
Right.
ultimately.
Right.
But it's also
It kind
why
of spoils it to have to go into a project thinking, yeah, we better get all these credits right because we need to get paid. It's like, wow, sometimes that's the wrong approach most of the time.
Greg?
Well, this is why it's so important that everyone who receives the credit information down the line, like everyone involved in this needs to understand that we now live in a dynamic world where the information changes, and that first submission of credits should not be viewed as 100% correct. It should be viewed as correct as it was the day that it came in. And everyone kind of has to adjust to that. There's no matter how many conversations we have about capturing the correct information on the front end or systematize it or use technology, we still have to allow for the possibility, for the inevitable possibility that something is going to change after day one.
So what are your individual ideas about how we could improve the process, if you have some?
Well, if there was some, and I'm just shooting from the hip, but if everybody had a card with some data on it, and when you sit down to do your part, you hold up your card and it's scanned, and that stays with that track, how much easier it would be if everyone was registered for such a thing like that. But yeah, there's several different systems that are being developed, but nothing has really made it easy yet.
If there were some sort of portal that the music business accepted, like a portal that existed that you can go online, whether it's on your phone, on your computer, that inputs data, that when you're in there, when you get with the writers, you actually meet with them for lunch and they tell you about it. You can put their stuff in there on the phone. If you're the engineers at the studio, you can put it in, and this space becomes known as a portal for the credits that can be disseminated to labels, to the PROs. That, I think it's a pipe dream, but that would be, like, to me, the perfect system. I don't think it would ever happen, but that's my 2 cents. I'd love that to happen because it would need to be accepted by everyone and seen as a place to go. And there's a way for it to be corrected, and vetted by the time it gets to, but it's one place and it can be shot out everywhere. That's what I'd love to see. Don't know if it would ever happen though.
You're kind of setting it up for what this conference is about,
Yes.
in that there are platforms and they're demonstrating their products in between the panels of this platform. The swipe card thing exists with sound credit, and I believe Session has an app on the phone where the musician can check in. So this is becoming reality, and these different platforms that can help us to collect the information during the process of recording.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think there's a lot of education needs to happen as well, because I've been trying to get session fixers for orchestras involved in the swipe card thing, and I'm having to convince them that they need to be involved at this stage so we can get their take on it, and they're sort of resistant to it, which is a bit bewildering to me. But I think we need a lot. Everyone knows that credits are important, but we need to educate people as to why this information needs to go in a digital form.
Maybe your fixers think that they're being replaced by a robot.
What is the fear? Because on our pre-call for this, I realized that, and a realization I was coming to anyway, is that the title of this is "Whose Job Is It Anyway?" And the truth is, it's going to continue to be a collaborative effort, and it's kind of everybody's job who's involved in the recording, from the engineers, the assistant if there is one, the musicians themselves to take the responsibility to try and make sure that they get their just desserts in terms of credits. The engineers, the poor working engineers, another thing they have to do, if they're willing, and we hope they are. Many of them have said they are, that especially with the tools coming online, that they are willing to contribute as much effort as they can. And of course the producer and producers, and the education process of letting everyone know. I mean, Sylvia, what you're saying about the creative process is so true. You don't want to be talking about the money and the while you're working, but at another point, that conversation should happen, because people need to make a living, and they need those pennies. Like Phil Ramone said years ago, they need those fractions of pennies from around the world, every one of them. On our pre-call, we also brought up the sort of jokingly the idea of a data assistant, of a person who a new role name of someone on a project. And I was thinking this morning, it's not really a new role. God bless Bruce Sweden, who just passed away, right? And Quincy and all of those people who the records that they made were complicated records, and they had coordinators.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, and we don't have that role now, and a lot of that is due to financial issues. People, music isn't making as much money as it did 15 or 20, well, like 20 years ago now, almost, although we're getting there. So is there room in the budget? And I know we're talking major label kind of thing here because we have Craig, but do you think there's a possibility that in the budget of helping to pay for the time that it takes to get all of this stuff correctly?
Well, I assume that's addressed to me.
I was looking at you, yes.
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes in certain situations, right? And I think the answer is yes even currently in certain situations. So if we're making a Broadway cast album, there almost certainly is someone there who is paying attention to every detail and getting all of that credit information 100% correct. In a world that we've been describing, where 4 different people are touching the record and all 4 of them are not even necessarily talking to each other, it's a little, I'm not sure that that's a practical solution. I think that this is also a little bit of a reflection of something Sylvia was saying earlier about when she would have an assistant. And of course, we remember when you were doing a session and there was an assistant who was actually writing down what the settings were on all the outboard gear, and all keeping track of all of that information. And maybe it was for recall purposes, maybe it was for credit purposes, but they were keeping track of all of that. And now the technology makes it so easy that role has been eliminated. But what has, the baby that's been thrown out with the bathwater is that no one's keeping track of what actually happened. So maybe when we talk about technological solutions, and this also goes back to, wouldn't it be great if the credits lived with the files, is that maybe this credit information should be in your session file. I recorded this in this place. This was the musician. And then when the song is mixed, it could somehow tell you whose pieces were used and what information they entered into that file. Maybe that's a solution.
There used to be, like you said, Maureen, there used to be like a career for someone to be a production coordinator. They would get hired by producers or by labels, and they would take care of an album or 3 or 4 songs. Like they literally would go around and make sure they had all the credits, who recorded what, where the engineers were, and they would get some sort of either a fee or percentage of the producer fee. But because budgets are less than what they used to be, And I also think that the way things are recorded now, there is not just that studio. You got to go multiple places. I still see a role available for people that used to do that, because that used to be very helpful for producers, so they could just focus on the creative. If the manager wasn't doing it, this production coordinator was in charge of taking care of all of that. I've seen that kind of go away, but that was very helpful. I think that there's a space for someone like that, like you said, a data entry person. Maybe that production coordinator now becomes that data entry person, but it plays that same role where producers can just bring this person on and they make sure that that stuff is tracked down. They're specifically there to get all of the proper credit information. That's possible, I think.
That would be a good end game, to have a single person that every part of the project fed into, whether that be just the mixer who's got no idea who he's dealing with, to the producer who's got a good idea of a lot of them, to the person that went on to after the producer to have it redone, or all those.
I mean, it may. I don't think it's. I mean, this is a whole new topic. I don't think it's an unreasonable goal. But as someone who was both an assistant engineer who collected the credits and a production coordinator who made albums with some pretty crazy bands who did stuff in different countries and with different people, that that's a job. I mean, it is a job. I don't know where it fits into the conversation about budgets these days. And then, of course, there are so many indie records being made that don't have, budgets barely at all. So that's a whole other piece of the conundrum.
Well, I mean, that's the big point that I think, because I see some people in the chat talking about, that's the A&R admin's job or the A&R coordinator's job, but that's all assuming that all these records are with major labels. But there are way more independent records being done right now that are relevant, that are on the charts, that matter, that don't have the structure of an A&R admin department at a major label. So all of these indie records, independent records, who is taking care of that? There's no A&R coordinator from the label. There's no A&R admin person there. So it needs to be done from an independent standpoint. A producer's sort of team or one of those writers, somebody in that independent camp has to kind of take charge of it. And I think that that's where the gap is between dealing with a major and all of these independent records. Even some of the records that get delivered to majors are, the A&R department really had nothing to do with it. They're just receiving it because the team took care of it. This production team or the artists did it all themselves and they're turning it in. Now we have to go back and address it. So I think that data entry person in that space, there's a opening there for someone or our company to kind of help facilitate that.
That's interesting. The original title of this panel was "It's Not My Job," because I do hear that. I hear that from. But in the survey I took before this, many of the engineers have said they are willing to do as much of the work as they can, and the reward for that is getting their credits properly visible. But I think it does come down to, this is a team effort, and it's probably going to stay a team effort for quite a while. And everybody really has to participate in it and be educated about the importance of it. That's a huge job, isn't it? But we have, I think, 7 minutes left. And I'm just checking to see if there's any questions we should answer. How are credits delivered? Excel, paper, file, all of the above.
All of the above. That's right.
All of the above, which is one of the reasons. Okay, as one of the members of DDEX who was instrumental in getting the RIN, Recording Information Notification Standard, created. That was the original idea of it, is that this is a file that contains all of the information that is linked to the music. It doesn't travel with the music. It's not in the music file because that's not really possible right now to put all that data in the music file, but it is possible to put in the music file the ISRC code. And the ISRC code, there's a standard for that. And the ISRC code is what links the music file to the credit file. It's those individual identifiers like ISNI, the International Standard Name Identifier, and the ISWC, the International Standard Work Code for the song, and the ISRC, the International Standard Recording Code, that those codes are what link the data file to the music file. So that is the process that DDEX has developed and is available through these platforms that are being discussed today. I've got a quote here from somebody on one of my committees said, if everybody pitches in and takes some responsibility for this, it makes it not as heavy a lift. I thought that was a good quote. But for sure, in summary, the DDEX standards, especially RIN, and the products we're seeing demonstrated at this summit that use RIN can help. So far, we've seen sound credit, where creators can enter their credits and send them forward in a RIN file, and where they can get an ISNI for free. And independent creators can get an ISRC code. We had Jamboree yesterday, which specializes in song splits information. And then upcoming today and tomorrow, there's other products like Session, Quantic, and Viva Sound, which are platforms that can ingest the credits and recording metadata. But something important I want to mention, and that the producers and engineers wing feels very strongly about, is that these platforms need to be interoperable. People need to be able to choose. I don't think there's going to be one universal platform that everyone everywhere is going to use. They're going to use the ones that work best, just like workstations, right? Some people are, whether they're creating on Pro Tools or Logic or any of the other platforms, people want to use artistically what they want to use, but those platforms can work within each other so that interoperable. And I think that's such a huge thing that we have to keep in mind. It's a basic tenet of standards, and we really need to ensure that it's part of the tools that we use to collect credits.
I love the idea of the sound credit having a standard card of information, or and because the idea of actually spending money out of a budget to have someone to hire someone to take down credits or to keep track of that is just like, wow, I'd much rather spend that money on the more creative side of it whenever possible. And so the more streamlined the system is, the better, for sure, for everybody.
Anything anybody would like to say that they haven't said?
I would say we've touched on it a little bit. All of these systems are, in the process of being built. These different portals for credits, for some that lean more for producers and some that lean more for songwriters on collecting splits. The big point for me is I know they're being worked on, and some of them look good. It's just I hope it gets to a place where they're all marketed properly and that they can be used, and whichever one you choose, and you just said it, and I just kind of drive it home, that they'll be interchangeable. The data can be shifted from one system to the next, because I know my dream of one universal portal won't happen. But if there's at least 3 or 4 that are industry-wise accepted, that they can be transferred over and information can be shared in some way. If someone did it on one system, the other system, there's some way for them to be collected where it can end up in one place. That would just be my wish.
Everyone makes records differently. It'd
Yes.
just be great to be able to choose the way of working that for collection of credits that you want, and be able to feed that on and it used sort of wisely at the other end.
Well, let's see if we can take a question or two here. Agree with Cameron that he doesn't know who he may have removed in the mix, but is it appropriate for Mixer to take note of what has been removed?
Ooh.
Possibly.
Did you say certainly?
I said possibly.
Possibly. Let's see what else we got here. We got a couple more minutes.
Right. That is an issue if you recorded a bunch of parts and then the mixer takes it out, do you still get credit for all that work that you've done? You know, that's a good question. Or do you get paid for that?
You won't end up on the performance. You won't get performance royalties out of it because you're not
Right.
there anymore. So as we talked about, that some sort of history in this as well, being able to know at what point your performance dropped off, if it did. Yes. Stop any fights when somebody will go, well, I played on that, and not understand that they were removed during the mix or something like that.
When is the right time to do collaborator contracts and split sheets? It's always tricky. It can be a creative vibe killer or seem like a lack of.
Sure can.
I always emphasize that a good written agreement is in everyone's interest, but still it can be awkward.
Yes.
Last question. That's a big one, but I don't know if we want to tackle that.
When is the right time to do a collaborate agreement? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'll give two answers depending on the level of producer and experience they have. If you're dealing with newer writer producers, it's easier to get those up front. When you get into the studio, they're just learning the process. It's been my experience that it's easier with newer writer producers. Once the session's done, you can sit down right there. Okay, what the splits are, and I'll leave a little sheet in the room, and they write down what the splits are, and they try to agree. The newer writers tend to be okay with that. The ones who are more experienced, they need a vibe. They need to make sure that the environment's right. None of this sort of thing gets inside of the room and gets in the way of the creative. So in that case, when you have a more experienced producer, from my experience, you do it later. After it's done, after you're happy with what you have. I have this producer that says that if my session is not happy and fun, I don't make hits. So I don't want to deal with anything business. I don't want to have any sort of contractual conversations come up at all. And once it's over, then you circle back and get it. So to me, it just depends on where your producer, client, or writers are in the stage of, what makes them happy.
Yeah. The creative process.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I think the collaborative process of making records, and hopefully people are inspired that the collaborative process of getting the credits right is so important. I think maybe that's the emphasis of this panel now, is how important it is to do it, and that everybody can play a role in it who's in the creative process, just checking to see if their credits are right, working out what their credit is, at the right time, and documenting it, and in the studio if you can, because that's where people know what really happened. And there's all these great products that are coming online to help you do that. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here with me today. It's just great to see you all, and you all had such important things to say. So
thanks, Maureen. Thanks,
Thank you for having
everybody
me.
on the panel. That was
Thank you
really
very
great.
much.
You have really created a snowstorm of chat going on in the things you've been saying. So it's obviously fired everybody up. So thank you all very much indeed.